layers and layers and layers of information are coming out, not just because objects are being examined in detail, but also because new technologies can be applied to them.
Was the mask created for Tutankhamun or for someone else?
In November 1922, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter chiseled a small hole into a sealed doorway in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. He held up a candle. When his patron, Lord Carnarvon, asked if he could see anything, Carter reportedly answered, "Yes, wonderful things." Behind that door sat the almost untouched tomb of a minor pharaoh named Tutankhamun, dead at 18 or 19, buried more than 3,000 years earlier. Inside were golden chariots, painted shrines, jeweled thrones, and nested within 3 coffins, one object that would go on to become the single most recognizable artifact in human history, a solid gold funerary mask weighing over 22 pounds, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise, and glass paste, its eyes rimmed in obsidian and quartz. For most of the centuries since, that mask has been treated as a kind of perfect, sealed truth, the flawless face of the boy king, untouched and unquestioned. But the mask has a second story, one that isn't hidden by any exotic technology. It's sitting in plain sight, in peer-reviewed papers, museum press releases, and public debates between some of the most respected Egyptologists alive. And that story is this. There's credible, published, scientifically argued evidence that the mask on display in Cairo was not originally made for Tutankhamun at all. This isn't speculation dressed up as fact. It's a real, ongoing argument inside Egyptology, one that started with a workplace accident, was reignited by a British scholar's controversial paper, and is still being fought over by name a decade later. The story of the mask's re-examination begins, unglamorously, with a broken beard. In August 2014, staff at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo were working on a lighting inside the mask's display case when the mask's long, braided blue and gold beard came loose and detached. Rather than call on a conservation specialist immediately, museum staff attempted a quick, unauthorized fix. They used epoxy resin, an industrial adhesive not meant for irreversible use on ancient artifacts, to glue the beard back into place. The repair was sloppy. Visitors and journalists later noticed a visible line of hardened glue smeared across the mask's chin, and photographs of the botched job spread internationally, sparking outrage among conservators and a formal investigation by Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities. Museum staff spoke to reporters only on condition of anonymity, for fear of professional consequences. Egypt brought in Christian Ekman, a German conservator with expertise in ancient gold work, to properly repair the damage. Ekman and an Egyptian-German team spent months carefully removing the epoxy and reattaching the beard using a reversible technique closer to what ancient craftsmen might have used. The mask went back on public display in December 2015, beard intact, glue gone. But while his team had the mask apart and under close examination, using X-ray fluorescence or XRF, a real, well-established technique that identifies the elemental composition of metals without damaging them, Ekman did something more than just fix the beard. He took the opportunity to examine a question that had quietly circulated among Egyptologists for years. Was this iconic mask actually made for Tutankhamun or for someone else? Here's the detail that makes this story genuinely strange. Nobody needed a hidden scanner to notice something was off. Howard Carter himself, back in the 1920s, recorded that the mask's ears were pierced for earrings, and then more or less moved on, treating it as a minor curiosity. It wasn't a small detail. In ancient Egyptian royal art, adult male pharaohs were essentially never depicted with pierced ears on their official funerary imagery. The convention was reserved for children and for women. An adult king's eternal, sacred image would not normally include this feature. For decades, this sat as an odd footnote that most scholars didn't push very hard on. Ekman's 2015 XRF analysis added a real technical wrinkle. The mask, it turned out, was made from more than one piece of gold, a modeled, separately made face section joined to the rest of the headdress and collar. Ekman's team found the join was made using a period-appropriate technique, and concluded that constructing masks in multiple gold sections was actually a normal Egyptian practice, not evidence of tampering. Crucially, Ekman reported finding no clear sign that the face itself had been swapped out or that the cartouches, the carved oval containing the king's name, showed evidence of having been altered from a different name. That should have settled things. It didn't. In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves, a well-known and controversial figure in the field, previously famous for proposing that hidden chambers might exist behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb, published his own analysis of the mask's construction, separate from Ekman's conservation report. Reeves argued that several details, taken together, painted a different picture than its all-original conclusion. He pointed to the pierced ears as a strong indicator that the mask was designed for a female ruler. He noted that metallurgical testing showed the gold alloy of the face measured as slightly different purity, around 23.2 carats, compared to the roughly 23.5 carat gold used in the rest of the headdress, collar, and Nîmes cloth. To Reeves, that discrepancy suggested the face had been manufactured separately at a different time, possibly for a different person, and later joined to a pre-existing mask body. He also argued the cartouches bearing Tutankhamun's name showed signs consistent with having been recarved over an earlier inscription. Reeves proposed a specific candidate for that earlier owner, a shadowy, poorly documented ruler named Nefertiti, a throne name many scholars believe was used by Nefertiti herself, Tutankhamun's stepmother and one of the most famous and most mysterious women in ancient history, when she may have briefly ruled Egypt in her own right after her husband Akhenaten's death. Ekman pushed back publicly and directly. He maintained that his own hands-on examination during the 2015 restoration found no evidence that the face was made of different gold from the rest of the mask, and no visible sign that the cartouches had been altered. Two respected experts, working from overlapping but not identical evidence, reached different conclusions, and that disagreement has never been fully resolved. It's still cited, argued, and re-argued in academic circles today. The debate might have faded into a footnote, except it didn't stay quiet. In 2022, Egyptologist Joanne Fletcher, a professor at the University of York known for her work on ancient Egyptian mummies and cosmetics, revisited the pierced ears argument for a history hit documentary, arguing that a king who died around age 19 would not still have been shown with the ear piercings typical of young children, meaning that feature almost certainly wasn't designed with Tutankhamun in mind. By late 2024, Fletcher and University of York research team pushed the argument further in more detail, again pointing to visible evidence of soldering around the face and repeating the idea that Tutankhamun's likeness may have been, in her words, effectively grafted onto a masked body originally intended for someone else, very possibly a woman, and very possibly Nefertiti specifically. This 2024 resurgence made international headlines again, and it drew immediate pushback from other scholars. Egyptologist Aidan Dodson, an expert on the Amarna period during which Tutankhamun's family ruled, has publicly expressed skepticism of the York team's conclusions, essentially reiterating Ekman's original finding that there's no solid material evidence of a face swap, and noting that some other royal mummies of the period, including King Tutankhamun's own mummy, also show pierced ears, which complicates the idea that piercings alone prove the mask wasn't meant for him. So where does that leave us? Not with a settled discovery, and not with a hoax debunked either. It leaves us with two camps of credentialed, published Egyptologists looking at largely the same physical evidence. Pierced ears, a two-part gold construction, a slightly different alloy composition in the face, and drawing opposite conclusions about what it means. That's not a manufactured mystery for internet clickbait. That's how real, unresolved archaeological debates actually look. Part of what makes the repurposed mask theory plausible to some scholars isn't just the metal, it's the tomb itself. Egyptian royal burials were governed by strict religious timelines, and there's long-standing scholarly consensus that Tutankhamun's burial was, by pharaonic standards, done in a hurry. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings is unusually small and modest compared to those of other New Kingdom pharaohs, leading some Egyptologists to suggest it may have originally been built for a lesser royal, a noble, a princess, or a queen, and repurposed for the unexpectedly deceased young king. Several other objects placed in his tomb are known to have originally belonged to or been intended for other members of the royal family, with names altered or overwritten, which was a documented practice at the time. Given that broader context of reuse and repurposing throughout the tomb, the idea that the mask itself might also have started life intended for someone else isn't a wild leap. It fits a pattern researchers already recognize elsewhere in the burial. Whichever side of the mask debate turns out to be correct, one fact isn't in dispute. Nefertiti remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of Egyptology. Her painted limestone bust, discovered in 1912 and now housed in Berlin, made her face nearly as globally recognizable as Tutankhamun's mask itself. She was the primary wife of the Pharaoh Akhenaten, who upended traditional Egyptian religion by elevating the sun disk god Aten above Egypt's other deities, a radical shift that Tutankhamun would later reverse after taking the throne. What happened to Nefertiti after Akhenaten's death is genuinely unresolved. Some scholars believe she took on a new throne name and ruled Egypt herself for a period before Tutankhamun's reign. Her tomb has never been definitively located. A mummy discovered in a side chamber of a different tomb, known as KV-35, has been proposed by some researchers as possibly being Nefertiti, but this identification remains contested and unconfirmed. In 2015, Nicholas Reeves separately proposed that hidden chambers behind the walls of Tutankhamun's own tomb might contain Nefertiti's original burial. That specific theory generated enormous public excitement and was later substantially undermined by follow-up remote sensing and radar surveys of the tomb walls, which failed to find convincing evidence of hidden chambers. So even as the mass debate continues, that particular avenue for finding Nefertiti's actual resting place has largely been closed off by real scientific investigation, not confirmed by it. Strip away the sensationalism, and here's the honest state of the evidence in 2026. The mask of Tutankhamun bears pierced ears, an unusual feature for an adult male pharaoh. It's constructed from at least two separately made sections of gold. Respected researchers, using real, legitimate scientific methods, XRS spectroscopy and metallurgical composition analysis, disagree about whether these facts indicate the mask was originally intended for someone else, possibly Nefertiti, or whether they reflect normal ancient Egyptian craftsmanship and no reuse at all. That disagreement runs between named, credentialed experts. Christian Ekman on one side, Nicholas Reeves and Joan Fletcher's team on the other, with other scholars like Aidan Dotson weighing in critically. Nothing has been definitively proven either way, and no scan, quantum, X-ray, or otherwise has produced a hidden name magically appearing beneath the surface. What has been produced is a genuinely open scholarly argument, conducted in public, about one of the most famous objects on Earth. That, honestly, might be more interesting than a manufactured conspiracy. It means the biggest mystery about King Tut's mask isn't some cover-up buried for 33 centuries and revealed by secret technology. It's that even with the object sitting in a glass case in Cairo, examined by world experts with real scientific instruments, we still don't fully agree on whose face it was actually made to represent. The gold has kept its secret so well that the disagreement over it may never be fully settled. Not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth may genuinely be ambiguous, buried under 3,000 years of repurposing, rush burials, and a family history, the Amarna period, that ancient Egyptians themselves tried hard to erase after the fact. If Nefertiti's real tomb, wherever it is ever found intact, it may finally answer whether the world has been looking at her face all along, hiding behind a boy king's name. Until then, the mask keeps its secret, and Egyptology keeps arguing, which, if you think about it, is exactly what